It's that time again. Marie Curie Fellowship applications are due soon. And every single year I work with a number of students to prepare and submit their Marie Curie application. And so in this video, I'm going to give you the benefit of that knowledge and walk you through the most common repeat mistakes I see every year and in almost every single application. So if you're ready to go, here are my top 10 mistakes I see on the Marie Curie Fellowship application and how to fix them when you submit yours. Let's get started. Mistake number 1, not answering the question that was asked. Even if you think this goes without saying, especially for the Marie Curie, this is much more nuanced than you think, so please keep listening. This particular application is pretty famous for having a lot of very specific essay questions that applicants need to answer. And annoyingly, sometimes the distinction between these questions is not very clear. Therefore, what you really need to make sure that you do, and I recommend this for every grant, but for the Marie Curie especially with all these different essays, you need to read the template document. This lists everything that you need and everything that the reviewers are looking for in detail so you can make sure you fully understand the question that is being asked. You also want to make sure that your response answers every single one of the trigger questions given in the template. These are there to help you address what the reviewers are actually looking for, what the reviewers are trying to score in this essay. And then finally here, before you even start writing, I also want you to check all of the essays and make sure that you are not including overlapping information between two essays, or that you're answering something in one essay that would maybe be better or stronger or more suited to a different one of the essays. If you don't know what to write, the template is going to spell out for you what the reviewers are looking for here. Do make sure that you answer every single thing that they are looking for each one of these essays, or you are definitely going to lose points on this response. As a bonus tip here, you can help your reviewer out by including the wording from the template and from the questions that they ask you directly into your answer. When a reviewer is reading essay after essay after essay of the same topic, it is really helpful for them to be able to pick out this key information they're looking for if you're using the same terminology or the same wording that they are looking for. So you can always try to reword your answers as well to address the questions, and this will also further help you to make sure that you, somewhere in your text, are addressing every single one of the questions that they're asking. For an example of what I mean of using the same types of wording, if a question is asking you for the multidisciplinary aspects of your project, you can start a sentence with "the multidisciplinary aspects of this project include." That signals to the reviewer that this is the information they're looking for, and it also helps you ensure that this text is in the essay. Mistake number 2, that builds off of mistake number 1, answer only what is asked for in this essay. Just because you have extra space in an essay doesn't mean you always need to fill it, especially if the information that you're filling it with is off topic. At best, the reviewer is just going to ignore this information because they are looking for these very specific things, or at worst, it's going to dilute your actual answer, it's going to annoy the reviewer, and you're not going to get as many points or as much credit for this section as you would hope for. So, with mistake number 1, definitely answer everything they're asking for. With mistake number 2, stop there. Mistake number 3, writing that is vague or unspecific. What you want to do instead is be specific. It is a common misconception that vague writing is going to be more applicable or more understandable to more people. But especially in terms of things like your Marie Curie Fellowship application, vague writing is just boring, uninteresting, and is going to sound like every single other essay out there. You want to avoid this. You want your essay to stand out. So the way that we're going to do this is dig in and be specific. One way that we're going to do this is dig into all of our writing throughout our essays and our research proposal and delete a lot of those filler words that don't actually mean anything. Words like very or a lot, you don't need those. This also applies to words like new and novel. Everything is new and novel at this point, okay? If you are proposing research, it better be new and it better be novel. You don't need to specify that to the reader. The same goes with significant. You should only be talking about something's significance if you are following it with a p-value. But what do you do instead? Because you still do need to show how your work is novel or new or significant. But that is the key. You don't want to just state that your work is these things. You want to show the reader exactly how or why your work is new or novel or significant. You're going to do this by being clear. You are going to clearly and directly state not just that your work is these things, but show the reader how your work is these things. If you can show why or how your work is significant or new or novel or important or impactful, you don't actually need to state that your work is these things. It will be very obvious for itself and in a much more powerful way that is going to make your writing, your essays, and your application stand out from the crowd. The same sorts of things go for terms like underrepresented. You don't want to say underrepresented. You want to say how underrepresented. Is it less than 1% of the population? Is it more than that, or is it less than that? You need to be specific. You also want to use this tip to replace vague terminology, especially around comparative terms. You don't really want to say something is more of something or less of something, or better suited or less suited or whatever. You want to say exactly how much better, how much worse these things are. Make it clear and be specific. Mistake number 4, not directly stating your innovations or the innovative aspects of your proposal. Just like in the point above, we want to be specific. We want to be very specific on these innovative aspects. These are one of the most important parts of your proposal. And we want to be very clear and have these exactly directly stated. In fact, I even recommend having a separate section with a labeled subheading in your proposal that states innovation and lists your innovation in a point-by-point format. This makes sure that the main innovations of your proposal are abundantly clear to your reviewer. It makes them very obvious, and it's also going to help your proposal stand out. You don't just want to vaguely talk about innovation. You want to show exactly how and where your work here is going to be innovating. This also solves another side issue of the writer or you not being clear on what your innovative aspects are. Yes, sometimes we know that this is maybe the next step or the next thing to try or something in general that we want to try in our research, but we haven't thought so much about what makes this work so innovative enough to put it into words. Let me state this very clearly. If you are not set and clear on what your innovations are in this work, it is not going to come across in your proposal. Really take time to sit down and write out, even if it doesn't make the final cut, bullet point lists of exactly what the innovations of your proposal are, boiled down to one clear sentence. This is going to make sure you are very clear on this. And even if you don't take my suggestion to include these directly into your documents as bullet pointed or numbered lists, then you still have this clarity in your head and you can make that much more obvious in your writing throughout this document. Number 5, having a scattered or unorganized introduction. Even more than in a manuscript, your space in a grant is limited. And a lot of times the way that this comes across is that a lot of the context gets cut from the introduction in order to make the word count. Or additionally, much of the introduction gets cut or moved or rearranged, and it does not follow a standard introduction layout that is going to help your reader see why work in your field is necessary. Oftentimes, these introductions get really scattered with different points kind of everywhere, not in a very nice flow, just throwing facts at a reader that you think that they need to know and not taking the time to put them together into a coherent story. But this is very unfortunate because if you cannot convince a reader why work in your field is important, you are never going to convince them why work on your specific project is important. So you want to make sure that your introduction follows the traditional introduction layout where the beginning starts very broad and then you funnel the reader slowly down into your project. The way that I usually recommend then writing your introduction is to start from your proposal. What are the aims or the goals of your proposal? What do you want to accomplish? Then ask yourself, why do I want to accomplish this? What gap is existing out there in the field that I want to solve with this proposal? Then, moving even more out from that, I want you to ask yourself, okay, why is work even necessary in my field? Why is it important that we answer these questions in general? Then, that last question you answered can become the first opening section of your grant that gives the reader a little bit of background into why work in your field in general is important and necessary. Then, once you've convinced them of that, you can talk about what's already been done in your field leading up to that gap that you determined that is the reason why this proposed research exists. Then finally, you can explain very slightly about the proposed research or what you want to do with this proposed research in your introduction, leading up to essentially an explanation of the aims or goals of this grant. This will also help you eliminate another problem I see in introductions where writers like to include an entire literature review. Again, the space in your grant is exceptionally limited. You do not need to explain to the reader everything that is done in your field. You do not need to go down side streets or tangents. You only need to talk about a direct line from why this work is important in the world down into your project. Anything else that falls outside of this direct line is maybe interesting, but it is not relevant for judging your grant. And that's the key here. Something may be interesting, but is it relevant? Keep it to what is relevant. Mistake number 6, not connecting the dots for your reader. What do I mean here? It is important to remember that you are the leading expert in this topic, okay? Even though you're applying to a Marie Curie Fellowship, you feel like you're still a student, you feel like you're still learning, you probably know more about your specific project than anyone else out there in the world. So, the problem that arises here is assuming that a lot of other people out there know more than we do because, when you're applying to this, you're applying to be a postdoc. That is not true. So the things that are obvious and evident and clear to you might not be so for your reviewers. So with this, we always need to be connecting the dots. We can't just ever throw a fact out at a reader. We always need to give a teeny bit more text that tells them what that fact means or why they should care about that or why it was relevant or important to bring up here in our proposal. This is going to be very important in your introduction to help you create a nice flow from one part to the other. So instead of just telling the reader about previous work that was done or explaining some literature, you want to actually talk about what that means and how that fits into the puzzle of your research that you're proposing in this grant. This is also going to be true in your research proposal section, where it needs to be very clear at each point in the research proposal why you were doing the experiments you're doing, why you're not doing them a different way, and why it is important for you to get the information or whatever you would be learning from these for your project. Why this information or whatever would be important to address the problems that you brought up in the introduction. Keep connecting those dots for your reader. Never assume that a reader is going to understand everything that you're saying. Always assume that you need to give that explanation, okay? Maybe what I'm trying to tell you here is to give your reviewers a little bit less credit than you want to give them, just to make sure that you have enough information in your document that they can read through it and get the information they need. Now, because this is going to add a little bit more text in a lot of different parts of your proposal, this leads to mistake number 7 of including too much irrelevant information in the document. We have a tendency as scientists to want our readers to know everything we know about a topic. Sometimes we think more information, more better, and sometimes we're just interested in these things and we assume that other people will be too. But this has the problem of potentially backfiring on you by diluting your actual main important message that you need the reader to learn. Overall, you need to be able to keep a laser focus through your proposal. Again, because space is so limited. Keep it strictly to your topic so that then you have the space to expand on those parts of your topic that are important as you need. You don't want your message diluted, and you don't want to have to cut context to talk about side facts or things that are maybe interesting but not relevant to your proposal. So therefore, to avoid diluting your main message and to give yourself the space to include enough context and explanations like we talked about in the previous point, you want to be exacting and very strict on what makes it through to the final cut. Specific things here that I want you to think about. Do you need to use multiple terms to describe the same thing? Probably not. You want to pick one term to describe something and use it the same way every single time. Do not confuse the reader with more terms when it's not necessary. Do you actually need to discuss those details of previous research? Or is it just enough for you to state that previous research has been done, cite their conclusions, and then put a reference to that work? It's very often usually the latter. Maybe that here you want to think about your proposal like a page-turner thriller. You need to keep your reader's attention and your reviewer's attention through this proposal, so you can't keep having extraneous information and side plots and things going on. You need to be very focused on the plot or the point of your story so that it stays on topic and it stays interesting and relevant to the reader and saves you space for that context in point 6. Mistake number 8, excessive repetition. Yes, we want to make our points very clear. We want to make sure that the reader understands the key points of our project, but we don't want to be repeating the same things over and over, especially not in the same words. These will sound repetitive and the reviewers will notice it. Your proposal is not that long. But here in the Marie Curie Fellowship application, where I see this most commonly is between different essays, where multiple different essays will repeat the same chunk of text. Again, your application is not that long. I promise you, the reviewers are going to notice that. And with that, it comes across as you didn't have enough other things to say that you had to repeat exact chunks of text. If you did actually repeat these chunks of text word for word, it comes across as lazy, and we don't want that. But the main point here is if you bring up information in one of these essays, you can assume that the reviewer is going to remember this to your different essays. And so here, to better utilize your space, you want to sort of divide and conquer with the essays. Determine which points you are going to talk about in which essays and divide them up accordingly so you don't have to be repeating points between essays. You can reference the reviewer to a previous essay for more detailed explanation of a particular point, but you don't need to repeat that point itself between essays. But I don't want you to keep this mindset only for the essays. This applies to the research proposal as well. If you have already mentioned something in a different part of the research proposal, you can just refer the reader to that point. Especially if you are using numbered subheadings, this becomes really easy. So you don't need to be repeating information anywhere. You can always point the reader to where more information can be found on that and continue on with your point in that particular section that you're writing. I have one exception here though, and that is for your innovative points. I think it is perfectly acceptable and maybe even desirable to repeat the innovations of your project in several different places and in several different ways throughout the proposal. Now, the one point I want to make here is notice I said in several different ways. Again, you never want to be repeating the wording the same word for word. That becomes obvious. But here, this is a unique opportunity to make sure that a reviewer who maybe potentially thinks a little differently from you will understand what your innovations are here. Because if you make sure you mention them at a few relevant different locations in your proposal, and you make sure that they're always worded differently in each one of these parts, you will make sure that you have written it somewhere in your document in a way that your reviewer is going to understand it. Mistake number 9, figures that require study. Now, while figures for papers can often get very complex with tons of different moving parts and lots of graphs and just black and white numbers everywhere, whatever, your figures for your grant should be much more like cartoons. Your reviewer is only going to spend a few hours maximum reading your proposal. If they have to spend 20 minutes interpreting a figure, that is 20 minutes that they are not spending figuring out why you're suited for this project or what your innovations are or how much this project is going to advance your career, whatever. The actual information of your figure is not going to be as important as the interpretation of that figure that the reviewer walks away from. So that is what we want to make sure is clear and stands out from this figure. Make sure that when somebody looks at your figure, that it is interpretable at a glance, and that what they interpret is what you are hoping that they interpret from this figure. If you're struggling with this, take your figures and give them to other people not in your field, maybe colleagues or somebody from a different lab or a relative, your partner, your grandmother, whoever, and see what they interpret from this figure and make sure it matches your intention. So here are a few things that you can try to make sure that your figures are very readable for your reviewer. Number 1, remove any excess text. If you need a little bit of text in there for some explanations of what's going on, that's fine, but try not to have whole paragraphs or whole sections in there that the reviewer needs to be reading. Try to keep it to 1 or 2 words here or there to label what something is or what something means to make it easily understood at a glance. Include attention shifters or things like arrows and cartoon bubbles, like I've said before, to point out the relevant information or the relevant trends for the reviewer. Don't make them try to determine these for themselves. Put in an arrow, make it colored, make it very obvious, make it very easy to see. These attention shifters, or these little arrows or explanations that you can embed into your figure, are also helpful because, again, remember what I said earlier, that the reviewer is likely not going to be an expert in your topic. You are going to be a bigger expert than your reviewer, and so you want to make sure that the way that you present your data in your figures is able to be interpreted by your reviewer. Don't just give them a graph. Show them on the graph itself what that data means. This is going to help your reviewer actually interpret this information instead of just having to necessarily look at it themselves, study it for themselves, and potentially come up with the wrong explanation. Simplify your figure as much as possible. Delete anything, literally anything at all, that is not serving a very clear and important purpose in this document. Again, this is going to help you with space. First of all, figures take up a lot of space, but it's also going to most importantly help with the retention span of your reviewer. You do not want to give them more information to have to sift through. Finally, just keep in mind what the purpose of these figures are for giving relevant information to your reviewer in a figure format. So again, just try to keep that in mind all the time. Ask yourself, is this relevant information? Is this going to help the reviewer's understanding? If your answer to any of those questions is no, then you probably don't need that figure and you should figure out a way to remove it from your document. And finally, mistake number 10, walls or pages of uninviting text that nobody wants to read. Instead, we want to work on having a visually appealing layout that is going to help drive the reviewer's eyes through our document, help keep them interested in reading it, and we never want to give them that feeling that you get when you turn a page and it is just text. I think we all know that feeling. We absolutely do not want to give it to our reviewers. So what are we going to do instead? We are going to be nice to our reviewer, because remember, our reviewer is probably reading, while maybe not actually a million proposals, I promise you by the time they get to the last one, it's going to feel like a million. And if your proposal is the last one and they're opening it and seeing these blocks of text, they're not going to be super interested in reading it, okay? We want to avoid any chances of them skipping or skimming over any of the important information in our proposal. So being nice to the reviewer means we need to make the information that they need to make their decision easy to find, easy to spot in the location where they are looking for it. So we need to make sure that our proposal is organized, that it's organized according to the guidelines, and then we need to make it visually appealing. How are we going to do that? Use numbered sections and use subheadings to break those sections up even further. This has the added benefit of making it very easy to reference other sections in your document if you need to reference other text. Next, use figures. We've already talked a bit about figures, but throwing figures onto each page if you can, even if very small, is a really helpful way to also break up these big blocks of text and give the reader's eyes somewhere else to go besides just line after line after line of text. Next, we're also going to make the text itself more appealing. Use bold, use italic, underline, highlights, colored text, whatever. I use all of these things in proposals to make your key points stand out. If you need to discuss broader impacts, make the word broader impacts bolded somewhere in your proposal so the reviewer's eyes can go straight to it. If you want to make the goal of your proposal abundantly clear, make it a different color text. Change the color to blue, for instance. This has a really fun added effect of allowing you to repeat text without actually repeating text or taking up any more space. How? Because try this yourself. Turn to a page of a document that has one line of blue text. Are you going to start from the beginning of that page and read till you get to the blue text? Probably not. And neither is your reviewer. If you have blue text on a page, your reviewer's eyes are going to go straight to that bit of blue text, read it, and then go back to the beginning of the page and read the whole thing. It is a great way to make points very clear and very obvious. This is also a very simple thing to do the night before your proposal is due when you are panicking. Go through and make it more visually appealing. While you are doing that, then pay attention to things like your line spacing. Very specific point here. Follow the line spacing guidelines for any proposals that you write, Marie Curie included. I promise you that your reviewer will know 100% immediately if you have shrunk the line spacing to below the allowed limits, and your proposal will be disqualified. Do not do that. Instead, maybe err on the side of much more line spacing. Put spacing between paragraphs, put spacing between subheadings to give the readers a little bit of white space on the page to help break up that text, make it easier to read. Even if you don't have much space in your proposal, you can probably go through and still add an extra point or two of space in between paragraphs or in between sections to try to break this up. Finally, when you are listing things, try to actually use a list. Write them out with bullet points or with numbered points or something like that to make these points much more obvious instead of one big block of text. One quick way to see where you might need to add a little bit more formatting, go into the print preview of your whole grant and look for any page that just looks daunting. You don't need to be able to read it from the print preview, but trust me, you will know what I mean. If you open the document, you open the print preview, and you see a couple pages that are just solid text, it's going to be very obvious to you that this is a place where you're going to want to go in and make a couple changes here to the formatting and layout of your proposal. So there are the 10 biggest mistakes I see in Marie Curie fellowships. Overall, when writing this grant or any fellowship, I want you to keep in mind that your reviewer is number one, likely not an expert in your field, and number two is reviewing lots of grants on top of an already full-time job and any other commitments or hobbies or family that they have and want to spend time with. Be nice to your reviewers. Don't overcomplicate things. Give them explanations. Make the figures simple. Make the text easy to read. If you would like a little bit more information about understanding the mindset of your reviewer for a grant proposal, I have another video that I will link to you in the comments about this. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. We'll reply right away. Best of luck submitting this Marie Curie Fellowship proposal, and hopefully now you'll stand out from the crowd. Happy writing.